Today we're going to be doing a DIY with resin. So how this came about is I was looking on YouTube and this really pretty art piece popped up. So then I kind of fell into a deep hole of resin art and just decided to try it myself. Then I came across ocean art resin and that really had me interested. So I started looking up all the different methods that are used to make art resin, all the different materials that are used, textures that can make the image really pop out. Before investing a ton of money into supplies to make art resin, I decided to buy a little bit of the items that I would need and experiment a bit. So this is the first piece that I used to experiment with the art resin. I still have the tape on the back, I need to finish it. It is a cutting board. I learned it's really important what resin you choose to use because some of it is toxic and you cannot eat off of it, for example. So I had to research and see what resin could be eaten off of. So that was definitely important. I really like how the waves turned out on this piece. With this small trial piece, it required only a small amount of resin, and I enjoyed experimenting with how I can work with the materials. After creating this piece, I decided that I wanted to challenge myself and make a really large canvas version. Let's go ahead and go over the materials that we need to start creating our piece of ocean resin art. So to start, you're going to want to be in a well-ventilated space. This is because you do not want to be breathing in the toxic fumes that are released from the resin while it is wet and curing. Next, you're going to want your canvas, or your choice of items such as a cutting board. You're going to need some acrylic paint in some shades of blue, white, and brown, and you're going to also use this to paint your first layer onto your canvas. I personally like to mix in sand with my resin to make it look a little bit more realistic. It's important to use a level to make sure that your canvas is flat before pouring any of your resin. Most obviously, you're going to need some resin. I like to use art resin, but there are other alternatives that are not as expensive as this brand. It's also important to wear your respirator. Even though you may be in your well-ventilated space, it's still important to wear your respirator so that you're not breathing in any toxic fumes. You're going to want to be wearing some gloves, and also some clothes that you don't mind getting ruined, because once resin gets on your clothes, there's no turning back. Next, you may want some maca powder or dye. You can also use your acrylic paint, and this is used to mix into your resin to create the color that you want for the ocean. You're going to need some containers to pour and mix your resin, a heat gun or blowtorch to get the bubbles out, and I like to use a blow dryer to mix the colors on my canvas. Now that we have everything we need, let's go ahead and get started. I started with my brown paint and began with the sand. Then I started with my lightest shade of blue and started painting where the water meets the sand. After that, I went on with my next darkest shade and kind of went in an ombre pattern from lightest to darkest. I tried to blend the colors together as well so that way it didn't look so choppy and that it looked more like a natural flow of water. After your painted base layer is done, you're going to want to let it sit and dry. Now that it's dry, we're ready to use the art resin. You're going to need 2 containers, one for the resin and one for the hardener. Make sure to read the directions on your resin, but mine is a 1-to-1 ratio. You're going to take your resin and your hardener and you're going to slowly mix and pour into one large container. Next, you're going to stir your resin, but make sure you do it slowly for about 3 minutes. This is because you're trying to avoid as many bubbles as possible. Now you're going to add your sand, acrylic paint, maca powder, or dye, and you are ready to start pouring your resin. So I have first added the sand and let it dry overnight, and then went ahead and started with my darkest blue in the corner of my canvas. One thing that I did learn is that a lot of people choose to do a layer of just clear resin on top of their acrylic paint. That way the resin doesn't sink into the canvas. Now I am pouring my middle shade of blue next to the darker shade. And here is why you want to be wearing that shirt that you don't care about getting ruined. And now I'm just pouring the lightest shade of blue in front of the middle shade. My resin came with this tool to use to move the resin, and I found it really handy when spreading the resin out. Next, I like to take my blow dryer to really blend and mix the colors of the resin. This step is a little bit unnecessary, but I personally really like how it turns out. Then I used my heat gun to get out out any air bubbles that may be on the surface. Next, you're going to take clear resin and create a line for where you want your wave to be. When I had done my research, I learned that you can either wait for the whole resin piece to dry before adding the waves, or you can add your waves when it's still wet. When working with such a large piece, I would recommend waiting for the resin to dry before moving on to the waves, but when I was working on my smaller piece on the cutting board, I didn't see that being as important. Now I am taking my white resin and going over where I want my waves to be. It is important to start with less because you can always add more, but you can't really take it away. I also learned this is where it is really important to have leveled off your work. I thought my canvas was level, but I did not properly level it beforehand, and I did notice once my waves started to form that they kind of started to sink. And I decided that was okay because I was going to make this my base layer anyways, but I was a little bit disappointed because I was pretty happy with how the waves had turned out. With that being said, I decided to let this piece dry, and then I returned to it within a few days to start on my next layer. Once you're finished with that first layer and you let the resin cure, make sure to cover it with something to prevent any dust particles or anything from landing on your art while it is drying. So here I am creating the next layer of the canvas. As you can see, I am recreating the steps that we previously went over. You can also see that the white on the waves did sink a little bit. However, I think that the blue on top of this creates a nice depth and it makes it look even more realistic. Also, this time I made sure that my canvas was level before pouring any resin to avoid the mistakes from before. Also, just a quick note, that small circle by the sand is just some light reflecting through the ceiling of my dad's workshop. This time I decided to blowtorch any bubbles that could be on the surface. Now we let it dry and just wait and see what it looks like the next day. So I did still have a little bit of sinking in my canvas, so I did a little more research to find out why that could be. And that's when I learned it's important to try and find a wooden backed canvas. That way your resin doesn't sink into the material and it's backed by a wooden board. So the rest of the canvas is dry and I went ahead and started doing clear on top where I wanted the waves to be. Then I went over with the white resin and started drizzling it on top of the edge of the wave. Next, I used my heat gun to slowly push those white waves over to make it look like waves crashing onto the shore. I then went and did this same concept for all of the waves throughout the whole canvas. And had such a fun time creating this piece of artwork, and I hope you enjoyed watching the time lapse. Let's go ahead and see the finished product, and I hope to see you in a video real soon. Thanks, bye!